Welcome to Thrive, a Paychex business podcast, your blueprint for navigating everything from people to policies to profits. And now, your host, Gene Marks.
First of all, thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Gene.
What is, first of all, an MVP principle?
So principal, I'm the founder of my firm,
Okay.
of my business.
But an MVP principle, like,
I would say
are there
those
other
two different
founders
terms.
and you're like ranked higher?
No, so I'm the founder, I'm the principal of my business.
Okay.
But MVP is a Microsoft MVP.
Yeah.
So I am one of, I believe, 35, 36 Microsoft MVPs in the United States with a specialization in Microsoft Excel.
Got it.
And so that comes about through my expertise, specialization, and also influence and advocacy of the tool.
Got it. Okay. Tell me a little bit more about that. Well, first of all, let's take a step back. So Simon Financial,
Yes.
What does the company do?
So Simon Financial, I founded probably about 12, 13 years ago. I come from a turnaround restructuring background, and around that time, I was working with mid-market companies. But I discovered that in the lower mid-market and below, so let's say under $100 million in annual revenue,
Right.
There was a huge need for advisory services in the financial planning and analysis, the FP&A side, and it just doesn't really exist much in that lower mid-market and below space.
Sure.
And so many companies are saying, well, rather than work for a consulting firm, why don't you work as an outsourced advisor, a fractional CFO, if you will,
Right.
and help these companies that may not have a full-time CFO build out FP&A functions,
Right.
or if they do have a CFO, oftentimes those CFOs come from controller backgrounds,
Sure.
accounting,
Sure.
and they don't have more of the analytical planning, the critical thinking background that an FP&A does. And so again, 12, 13 years ago, going into this space, a lot of small companies said, we want the skills of a CFO, but we don't want a full-time CFO.
Sure.
Or we
Sure.
have a full-time CFO, but they come from an accounting background. We need somebody who's a little bit more strategic.
Got it. So give me an example of like a typical engagement of yours.
So there's two different ways that I do this. There's one on the advisory side, where there's a company that says, we want to grow, we want to put together cash flow forecasting, modeling. We don't really know how to put that together because we don't have a dedicated FP&A team. And our CFO, coming from a controllership background, might not
It's
have
more
that
of an
background
accountant
either.
than anything else. Okay.
Right, more of an accounting function.
Right.
Or there's a company that's going through distress or a turnaround and they say, well, we just have an accountant on staff or we have a controller. We've never really gone through this kind of an experience before. You have. Can you help us either negotiate with our lender or have conversations with our investor team or serve as in some ways, an interim CFO to help the company get out of the mud?
Got it.
And then outside of that, what I discovered a decade ago was that many of these companies don't have the skills, the
Yeah.
background to be able to do this on their own.
Right.
And so while some companies may come to me and say, we want you to do the work for us,
Right.
many companies say, we want you to teach us how to do what you would be doing
Got it.
if you were advising us.
So why are you here at Engage? There is CPE credits probably kind of help, but that can't be your main reason, is
No.
it?
So I've been asked to come to Engage over the years because I come from a strategic finance background.
Right.
And a lot of the attendees of this conference coming from more traditional accounting and tax backgrounds.
They don't have that skill set.
They don't have that skill set.
Got it.
And also with a lot of the CPA firms where they're getting margin compression on tax services, on audit services, where a lot of their potential is more on the CAS and advisory and outsourced FP&A and outsourced CFO services. And so they say, we want you to teach our audience how to think that way, how to position that way. And I remember when I presented a couple of years ago, I had, I don't know, maybe about a 10-slide presentation. I got through 2 slides over the first hour of the presentation.
Because there were so many questions.
Because there were
on what you're
so
doing.
many questions,
Yeah.
and there was so much, we've never seen this before. We need to do that.
Right.
Teach us how to do that.
Got it. So because of your relationship with CPA firms and what you're doing with your clients, talk to me a little bit about technology. How has that changed in the past 10 or 15 years that
You
you've been
bet.
doing this?
So I'm a little partial, but I'm also open-minded and understand where we're going.
Okay.
So I say I'm partial because as a Microsoft MVP in Excel, I have a love and a passion towards Excel.
Sure.
But what I say to people is, as much as I love the tool, it is not the right tool. It is not the best tool for all things financial planning and analysis or accounting. It's great to take many companies in whatever engagement we're talking about from 90% to 100%,
Okay.
but not from 0 to 90.
Right.
And so where technology has gone in, certainly in my space in finance, is We're going more towards cloud-based, streamlined, scalable solutions that are tied into back-end data that don't have to be super manual the way that an Excel or Google Sheets is, but they can tie into Excel and Google Sheets.
Got it.
So
Got
they
it.
work together in partnership, not a one versus the other.
Do you think like AI will replace the MVP in Excel someday? Or would it all just become natural language back and forth?
So it's an interesting question, and it's interesting for a few reasons. Is one, if you'd asked me the question several years back, I would have said, no way. Like it's good, but it's not that good. But in more recent months, I have actually changed my mind because it has gotten so much information.
Yeah.
It has learned from our interaction with the tools that it's gotten exponentially better. And if you think about over the last 2 years, the growth, and you say, well, what about the next 2 years? It's going to be exponential. It's
Sure.
not going to look like what we did. I also created the LinkedIn Learning course, Copilot and Excel for FP&A.
Okay.
So I also know where Microsoft is investing there. What we're likely going to see is AI, yes, it's going to augment a lot of the work that we do in finance, Excel, and planning. I'm not going to say it's going to replace everything that we do, but it's probably going to carve out some of the necessity in our brains of what I learned in college, where a lot of younger people who are going through college, they're not going to need to know some of that modeling and some of the analysis work that we said was going to make us indispensable.
Sure.
Now the machines are going to make that far less indispensable.
You know, I wrote a piece for Forbes, it was a couple of months ago, and the title of it was How AI is Killing the Harvard MBA. Because just to what you said, the power of where you see this going and the models that the large investment banking firms are investing in can do this forecasting, do those models faster with so much more data, with so much better results than having like a team of guys that you're paying $1 million a year to do.
You bet.
And I guess that's where it is going. That the technology itself will be making those decisions.
Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit about what Microsoft is doing, at least what you know when it comes to Copilot.
Okay.
And the reason why I ask you that is, there was a video I was watching recently. Some guy was trying to demonstrate Copilot, and he was struggling enormously with Copilot because he had the audacity to have more than like 1,000 rows of data in a spreadsheet, and Copilot
Right.
was like choking on it.
Right.
I just want you. I want you to give our listeners and our viewers just a taste of reality,
Yeah.
where it is now, and where you think it's going to go.
Sure. So I can share some. I can't share everything because I'm
Understood.
under NDA.
Understood.
But I'll take a step back and say Copilot is not just for Excel, it's for Microsoft.
Okay.
Right? So if you were to use Copilot in Outlook or Word or PowerPoint, think about what most AI that consumers are acquainted with today is their large language models.
Yeah.
They're stringing together the language that we use based upon what we're typing in and really the research and machine learning that it's done in the space. And so it's great with taking our thoughts, our outlines, I should say our thoughts and putting them into outlines.
Sure.
And then taking those outlines and putting them into presentations. To your point, Gene, there was recently an interview of the CEO of Goldman Sachs who
Okay.
said, we're not going to need all of these analysts. We're not going to need all these associates because what used to take weeks to put together a pitch book, we can now do in 30 minutes.
Absolutely.
So on the words side, on PowerPoint and Word and email, this is going to be part of our lives. This is going to be very normal. On the Excel side, I'll be totally candid and say that it's not where true game time is going to be years from now. Because it's how do you get artificial intelligence to understand the kinds of formulas you wanted to build for the kind of analysis you need
Sure.
in the time frame that you're looking for. It's not there yet. But ultimately the goal that Microsoft has, and it's really the goal that all of these AI tools have, is we don't want you to be in our tool and then have to leave our tool to go somewhere else
Sure.
to use that tool
Sure.
to get your answers and then come back over here. So what I anticipate is going to happen, and it's really no secret, is Microsoft is going to want this to all be part of their suite.
A big ecosystem.
Right, an enormous ecosystem
Yeah.
where you're working in Word, it moves your language over to Excel.
Yep.
You're in Excel, it takes that, puts it over to PowerPoint, and you're within their whole Office suite, their whole ecosystem where you don't need to leave.
Okay.
And they're giving you all the solutions that you're looking for.
Okay, how does this translate into talent? You are you work with a lot of CPA firms. You're a financial services firm yourself. Is it just you, by the way, or do you have more, people on your team?
So I'm the principal, I have contractors and I have a back office, but
Fair
I
enough.
don't have any W-2 full-time employees.
So how will this change the kind of people that you're going to be employing in the future?
Mm-hmm.
How will it change? I mean, all these CPAs that are here and engaged, like how's it going to change their their recruiting, their talent management? Like, who are they going to,
It's a huge question. I can make my predictions.
Sure.
What that's going to come to fruition, we'll see, or maybe it won't. But I'll also bridge this. It's not just my firm that I would answer this from the perspective of, I do a lot of training and development. I do a lot of L&D. So I go into Fortune 500s and I train their FP&A teams.
Okay.
And so the question almost always arises is, Carl, we know that AI is the big buzzword right now. What does it mean for our jobs? And then also, to your point, from a recruiting standpoint, what does that mean in terms of upskilling our people and hiring the right people? What should we be looking for as relates to skill set?
Sure.
So what I say to people, and in my conversations with chief technology officers at FP&A software companies, is, where are you taking AI? What do you think it means for these sorts of people who are going to be using your tools? And most of what I'm getting from them is, we're not trying to be everything and anything to everyone.
Sure.
We're trying to make people more productive.
Sure.
We're trying to save their time. We're trying to reduce and eliminate many of their mistakes. So it's not like this is going to replace your analysts. It's how do we make them more productive? How do we make them more streamlined? How do we make the mistakes less costly? And so what I say when I go into these companies and I train their people is, AI is not going to replace you, but you need to start learning how to use AI to do your job better.
It's a quality of life thing as well, isn't it? I mean,
Yes.
a lot of the work that they're doing is probably mundane
Yes.
or boring, and that causes like job dissatisfaction, whereas AI theoretically could do a lot of that stuff for them.
Right.
So, Carl, as a CPA and somebody that works for CPA firms, you know about the talent shortage that's in the industry. You know the recruiting problems they have. I don't know how old you are, but I can say, like, back in my day, there was a certain amount of credits that you got. You had to do 2 years in public, and then you could sit for the exam and all that kind of stuff. Then, like, the credit, all the requirements went up, and I feel that kind of turned away a lot of people. What are your thoughts on, like, talent and recruitment in the profession? Like, how do you think the profession could recover?
Yeah, so maybe to put a little bit of an age on me, I was the first generation of graduates that sat for the CPA exam requiring 150 credits.
Okay. I'm sorry to hear that.
So I grew up right when Enron went down and Arthur Andersen.
Yeah.
And Sarbanes-Oxley got passed, the 150 credit rule increase, and it was still a great profession. I mean, it still is a good profession.
Of course.
Okay, now you've got to go to an extra year of school. You got to sit for the exam. We're going to make it a little bit easier so you can take the individual sections by themselves instead of all in. And I had managers who were like, Carl, you have no idea what I had to go through. You got it so easy. What I think the profession needs to do a much better job of is, instead of, I went to a Big Ten university, undergrad in economics and finance, master's degree in accounting. But at my university, it was, here are these firms coming, they are recruiting for audit and tax, and that's your path. And what I have learned throughout my journey over 2 decades is that's not the only path.
Couldn't agree with you
If you
more.
have a background in accounting, there are dozens, if not hundreds of different avenues that you can go down and have a wonderful career, make good money, have a wonderful network, and choose where you want to go next. But the problem that I've long seen is audit tax. We have to do a better job of going to young people who are either in undergrad, grad school, or right out of school and say, these are the many different paths that you can go down. The background and education that you get as an accountant and the critical thinking skills that you've built can be used in so many ways, and it's so in demand.
Yeah, it's funny. One of the senior executives on the marketing side here at Paychex, CPA. And there are, and I've met other, I have a friend who recently retired. She was the CMO at a Fortune 100 company, and she was also a CPA. And the profession itself doesn't talk about that. You're right. It's like they put you into like this lane of either you're an audit or you're a tax person, and they don't say that like having a CPA gives you the ability to have it's financial literacy, and that can be in a data-driven world that can be applied in a million different places. And I guess the profession needs to do a better job of doing that.
I agree.
Yeah,
thoroughly.
When you look at firms now, and again, you deal with CPA firms, what firms like impress you? Like there had to have been something you stumble onto where you're like, these guys really got their act together, or I really love the way they run their practice. Like, what is it about some of these firms that impress you?
I think to sum it all up is a forward-thinking firm.
Okay.
Versus saying we are an audit firm, a tax firm, and maybe an advisory firm.
Okay.
Super traditional. The firms that I think are impressing me the most are the ones that have amazing cultures where people are super checked in, they are proactive, they're always looking for opportunities. But also from the firm standpoint on the leadership team is they're always taking a look at where is the future of business and their clients. It's not, we're going to be the best audit firm in the country. It is, we're going to be the best professional services firm in the country and serve our clients in the ways that they need to be served. The reason why a lot of CPA firms come to me is they say, we're an audit and tax firm, but we know that our future is in advisory.
Sure.
It's in technology. It's in FP&A services. It's in outsourced CFO support.
Right.
And a lot of them are saying, well, we don't know how to do that. We don't know what that looks like. The best firms are the ones who have already seen that years ago and said, oh yeah, we already started an outsourced CFO services firm. We're already doing FP&A services because we have all of these audit companies that said, yeah, we need help on cash flow. We need help on rolling forecasts. We need help on technology implementation. But they're seen as partners, not as implementation specialists or a traditional accounting firm. So the firms who are not thinking like we're accountants, they're thinking we are professional services helping these clients.
So these are guys that actually have guys like you working as partners in their firms rather than outsourcing it to people like yourself.
That's right.
What about you? Do you think you'll be doing this for another 20 years?
I am probably going to continue to do the L&D space for a very long time. There has been so much demand over the last 3 years that it's actually taken me more away from the advisory side on the CFO services and more on how do we actually teach our people who are in the CPA firms to be more like you.
Got it.
And so it's not we want to hire you to do the work for us. It's we want you to teach a man and a woman how to fish, not give them the fish.
How do you bill for your services? Are you like a value add guy or are you an hourly guy?
Both. Well, I shouldn't say hourly. I thought you were going to go in a different direction. So I am a scope of work person.
Okay.
So they'll come to me and say, this is what we want. What does that look like? And I'll say, here's scope level 1, level 2, level 3, and this is going to take us 5-6 months to do or a year to do.
Okay.
Or it is, this is what our objective is for our team. What does a curriculum for that look like?
Yeah.
And I craft that. And that may be based upon per day. That may be based upon multiple sessions that we're going to be doing over the span of 6 or 12 months.
Right. And do you serve clients mostly? You're in the Chicago area?
Yes.
So mostly in the Chicago area, or do you travel?
No, actually, hardly have any clients in Chicago. I've been on the road for the last 2.5 months.
Okay.
Obviously here, last week was Dallas. Before that was California. Before that was North Carolina. So these are Fortune 500s. These are mid-market companies.
Sure.
Where they say we want to have our FP&A team or our controllers think more strategically, be better with Excel, be better with modeling, be better with thinking, be better with storytelling, and they don't teach that in school.
It seems like you're doing more education than actual work itself.
These days, yes.
Yeah, and it also seems like face-to-face is the place to be in that line of work.
It's changed, and I maybe credit Jamie Dimon over the last handful of months who said everybody needs to come back to work.
Yeah.
Because over the last, I'd say 4 years, a lot of it was virtual.
Yeah.
Right? If you think about what happened after the pandemic, people said, okay, well, we realized we can do a lot virtually.
Yeah.
But then Jamie Dimon and Jeff Bezos and others who are like, no, we're coming back to the office. Maybe full-time or it may just be hybrid.
Yeah.
There is a need for people to be face-to-face with each other to start building that kind of rapport and that culture together. Does it have to be 100% of the time? No way. Does it have to be zero? I don't know that it's zero. So it's how do we get our people working together, seeing each other, and then also developing?
You know, it makes me laugh is I have a friend who's a managing partner of a national law firm, and he says the biggest pushback he gets from requiring people to come to the office is from his older partners.
Yeah.
The younger people, like, they're actually okay to come in. It's like the old guys are like, you know, we put up with all this for the last 30 years.
Yeah.
We don't want to come in the office anymore.
Yeah,
so
there's definitely some generational dynamics in play.
Yeah.
And then everybody's different, but we gotta learn how to play nice with each other.
Carl, if you could go back to yourself 20 years ago and say, hey, I'm going to give myself advice for a better life and a better career, what would you have told yourself?
So, Gene, I think I'll take it back to where I said the audit and tax, perhaps silo, is this world is not linear. And especially with what's going on with AI and hybrid work and a younger generation that doesn't believe the same things that some older generations have believed.
Not that they're wrong.
Right. It's I might work somewhere for 2 years or 3 years or 5 years or 8 years, but I might have a half dozen or a dozen jobs throughout my career. But guess what? I might actually have multiple careers throughout my entire life.
Yeah.
And so I think rather than saying I'm going to have a 10-year plan, what does that one linear path look like? It's what's your 2-year plan? where are you going to go? Where you're going to learn something? The firm's going to invest in your development. You're going to make great connections. You're going to get great experience, but you might not be there forever. What's going to be your current play? What's going to be your midterm play? What might be your long-term vision? And think a little bit more modular versus linear. And I think that that's not just advice for myself. I think that that's advice for young people now.
That's great advice. I'm done. Carl, that was great. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Gene. Thanks for having me.
Do you have a topic or a guest that you would like to hear on Thrive? Please let us know. Visit payx.me/Thrive Topics and send us your ideas or matters of interest. Also, if your business is looking to simplify your HR, payroll, benefits, or insurance services, see how Paychex can help. Visit the resource hub at paychex.com/works. That's WORX. Paychex can help manage those complexities while you focus on all the ways you want your business to thrive. I'm your host, Gene Marks, and thanks for joining us. Till next time, take care.
This podcast is property of Paychex Incorporated 2025, all rights reserved.